as far as I know, the only living witness to the Remagen Railroad Bridge going into the Rhine River.
Yeah, tell me about that.
People of Remagen love their bridge. They loved it because it was an attraction for visitors from all over the countryside. And they loved to stroll across it on Sunday afternoons, to have picnics near the site of it. And they're right proud of the fact that the bridge was a strategic link between the German Ruhr on the north and the Saar-Moselle region on the south. Everybody knew that it would take a long amount of planning to cross the Rhine River, because this was the big natural barrier between the Siegfried Line and the straight shot toward Berlin. So even before we landed in Normandy, the Supreme Headquarters began to lay its strategic plans.
There was considerable argument as to how we should cross the Rhine when we reached the West Bank. The British argued, particularly Marshal Montgomery, that we should cross only in the north and make our attack north of the Ruhr. So that my plan was to cross the First Army just south of the Ruhr, and the Third Army under Patton to cross down somewhere near Koblenz, and then join them together and attack to sweep around the south and east side of the Ruhr and connect up with the 9th U.S. Division, which at that time was under Monty, on the east side of the Ruhr, and then clean up the Ruhr. As a matter of fact, we did do that later and secured something like 368,000 prisoners in the Ruhr.
The Remagen Bridge was still standing. His first reaction was, let's get some artillery down on that, because look at all those German vehicles and troops that are crossing. However, the order came back from higher headquarters, nothing except airbursts would be fired at that bridge.
Captain Friesenhahn was calling from the tunnel entrance. Captain Bradke, combat commander! I rushed over to him. Still completely out of breath, he reports to me, the Americans, they're the Becher timber mill. This mill was located immediately behind the Rhine. In other words, they had reached the bridge. I told him, Friesenhahn, blast the bridge, blow it up. I have no permission. Major Schurler is the only one who can give the order for demolition. At that moment, Major Schurler was on the other side of the tunnel, 350 meters away from us, only to be reached on foot. So I dashed off through the dark tunnel to Major Schurler. I reported to him, the Americans are going to cross the bridge. Major Schurler is very calm. I said, Major, if you don't give orders to blast the bridge, I will do so. Then go ahead, have the bridge blasted. I ran back to Captain Friesenhahn. Back again through the dark tunnel. Again, minutes passed before I could reach him. As soon as he could hear me, I called out to him, Friesenhahn, blow up the bridge! Friesenhahn shouts, full cover, full cover! Everybody in the tunnel lies down flat on the ground in order to escape the tremendous blast we expected.
As far as we know, we actually saw the bridge lift up off its foundation. There was dust and debris thrown all over, and after a while, you couldn't see the bridge anymore. It wasn't too long. The dust cleared, the bridge was still standing. And Timmerman said, okay, move out.
Instinctively, my hand comes to my neck. I know. If the bridge doesn't go down into the water, my life will be at stake.
This bridge enabled us to get across the Rhine here without having to make an assault later on. And really made a decision to cross on a wide front easier for Eisenhower to make.
5 tanks and about 120 infantrymen across the Remagen Bridge, a pretty thin force to hold a strategic point like that. But the next morning, all of the American troops within miles around converged on the bridgehead, and within 24 hours, 8,000 American soldiers had crossed the Remagen Bridge.
It was funny because I was in an outfit called Field Artillery Observation, and we were up on a knoll, actually a hillside, just outside of Remagen. Telephone lines stretched across it, and I can remember my commanding officer saying, who I don't remember now even what his name was or anything, because that's back 60 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
But I can remember him saying, they told us to string our wire over here, but I don't know why. And at that time I was a corporal, and he says, Corporal, I'm going to tell you like it is. String your wires across that bridge. And he says, if you're like me, you wonder why, go ahead and wonder, but he says, you'll never get the answer.
Yeah.
And
Surprised that it was still up? As I understand, the Germans were blowing up every bridge across there, right?
well, yeah, of course, the trouble with me was, you have to remember I was a railroad brat.
Right.
That means my father was a railroader.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very partial to railroads.
Right.
And so I said, well, naturally the railroad bridge would stand up anything against anything the Cross would do.
Right.
Command post in the cellar of the burgomaster's house at Erpel, and we commanded the development of the initial bridgehead across the Rhine River. Beginning that morning and continuing for a number of days later, there was a constant stream of American troops from the west bank to the east bank of the river.
The American Army engineers had laid probably 2x8s or 2x6s, I don't remember now, down so that the Army vehicle could drive over it.
I see.
And it was never intended to be a footbridge.
Right.
It was strictly built for a railroad bridge, and then between the rails, they laid this. Actually, it was 2x6s, 2x8s, and so forth, and we walked across that. Probably we crossed that bridge. In a 24-hour period, we probably crossed it 15, 20 times a day.
My unit, the Combat Engineer Battalion, worked hand in hand with a bridge construction outfit that was more or less in charge of erecting the dismembered pieces of iron and steel that were the upper part of the bridge. Ours was mainly the job of the flooring of the bridge. This was a railroad bridge, by the way. And we worked feverishly around the clock, 24 hours a day in different shifts, to build a Bailey Bridge, to get treadway on the bridge so that we could give the boys some support or get some equipment to them that were fighting so hard on the other side of the river. During this time, there was constantly periods where enemy aircraft was coming in, strafing the bridge, dropping bombs, trying to knock this bridge out. There was artillery fire. We stopped periodically to get under cover for these. One time I remember, rather stupid of me, enemy aircraft came over, and as it did, I tried to find something to hide under, and it was the Bailey Bridge that we were constructing. And after the strafing was over, I realized that this is probably the worst place that I could have been, because if that bridge had been hit, I'd have been caught or trapped underneath there. But these are the things that you remember afterwards, at any rate. This was a constant turmoil. It was men racing against time, that we needed help for those fellows over there, and we were working real hard, equipment flying all over the place.
For that bridge, like, maybe 15 minutes before it went in the water.
My word.
Remember this officer saying to me, just before I made my last walk across it, he says, Corporal, he says, you got to remember, he says, that bridge could go down at any time. And I said, sir, if it goes down, it'll take me down with it because I can't swim. And he laughed and he says, I don't think even if you could swim, that you could swim the Rhine River.
Yeah.
And
Something like rifle fire. And we looked up in the air as if to look for aircraft, but instead there was dust coming up, rising from the bridge, and it seemed to totter a little, and it seemed to sway toward us. And then the center section of the bridge started to cave in. We had trucks up on the bridge that part of it was on the center section and part on the abutment side, so that this truck, I can remember, just folded up like an envelope. Pieces of equipment and pieces of the bridge were tumbling down. And I think our first reaction was to take cover that either the bridge had been hit or for some reason that it was going to fall. And then just as rapidly as you can well imagine, that whole big structure disappeared in front of us.
just before that, just before the bridge went down, because I can still remember my exact words, because we had what was known as radio silence then. Mm-hmm. And we were under no circumstances supposed to break that.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you, I sat up there on that hillside looking down, and my exact word was, oh my God, the bridge is down. So that I broke radio silence, and I, quite frankly, at that time, I could have cared less.
Yeah.
No matter what they did to me, if they wanted to take me out, shoot me, that was fine. But I was going to let the world know that the Remagen Bridge was down.
Yeah.
And I can remember having a war correspondent come to the cave afterwards. He was a correspondent for NBC, and I can remember him saying, Corporal, are you the one that announced that the bridge went down? And I said, you're damn right I was. Well, that was my moment of glory, and I wasn't going to give it up for nobody.
Yep.
You know, when you're 19, you do a lot of things that you wouldn't do when you're 78. And
Rapidly as you can well imagine, that whole big structure disappeared in front of us. And now we're all running to see what we can do about fishing people out of the river. That it was almost a bubbling, roaring noise that it almost seemed like the river itself had been turned into a boiling pot with all this debris falling in it, and men screaming, and you could see fellows were hurt and grasping for something to hang on to and going down the river, where eventually they were picked up. But ours was a case of real turmoil then.
And it was, I lost a good buddy. Went down with it.
Lots of reasons contributed to the collapse of the Ludendorff Bridge on the 17th of March. In the first place, the German demolition on the 7th of March had really shattered one side of the bridge and weakened it seriously. Then when the Americans put planking on the bridge to cover it over and cover over the holes which had been blown in the bridge, this added about 50 tons of weight to the bridge. There was a great deal of heavy pounding from the tanks and the vehicles that crossed. The German artillery shells tore a lot of additional holes in the bridge. Then there were the bombs that the Luftwaffe dropped on the bridge itself. One of the real reasons, I think, in addition to this, that contributed to the collapse was the amount of heavy equipment that the engineers moved onto the bridge. Cranes, electric arc welders, air compressors, all these things set up vibrations. The American artillery batteries, and particularly anti-aircraft batteries, that set up vibrations that caused all the ground to shake around the bridge. I don't think that you could say that any single one of these factors caused the collapse of the bridge, but the combination of them caused the structure just to weaken and die on the 17th of March.
I assume you had a chance to see them.
Oh, yeah.
How did you feel?
Quite frankly, I think like any other 19-year-old, I hated them.
Right.
Because in my estimation, it was their fault that my life was disrupted.
Every major victory in war is a result of long planning, long preparation, with the loss of often thousands of men. But when something comes along that is unexpected and you have this great prize, now there's a great alarm. In the other cases, you've expected it, you've planned for it, and here you come along with something that gives a great lift to the morale of the whole force, everybody. I think from private up to our bosses in Washington and London knew that the war was over. Every one of us realized that if Hitler had the slightest sense, he would immediately surrender. But it was the gallantry of the men that did it is something that should never be forgotten. And their names really ought to be in some, I'd say, permanent place in the...
I'm Kristen Stein, Director of the Fenton History Center in Jamestown, New York. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation, which is just one of many stories from our community's rich history. The Fenton History Center preserves our shared history with the presentation of educational programs and exhibits, the maintenance of a collection of local artifacts and archival materials, and a library specializing in local history and genealogy, all for the benefit and use of the public. For more information about the Fenton History Center and its activities, call 664-6256.